This is episode 3 of the Jaded podcast. In this episode, I'm going to be talking about emotions because this is truly one of the most important aspects of our existence, uh, in my opinion. And I think that I have an interesting perspective to share on this. A couple months ago, I smoked too much weed and I ended up in psychosis. I was experiencing something called dissociation quite intensely. And one aspect of dissociation is emotionlessness. So, for a period of about 5 months, I wasn't experiencing any emotions. This means no fear, no love, no happiness or sadness. It was a complete absence of emotion. And for many, because they've never felt numb before or only a sort of uh, negative numbness caused by depression, they aren't able to quite comprehend what this would be like. Many people, because they experience very intense, uncontrollable emotions, would see this as an incredibly positive thing. They would envy me. But what I can say about the experience is that emotions are, uh, it's like you have a canvas, and painted on the canvas is the background of a beautiful landscape. And emotions are like the foreground. They are really what makes the painting worth looking at. It's because we're so used to having emotions in the same way that when we have someone very close to us, when they die, we realize how much we appreciate them. Because most of us are always experiencing rather intense emotions. We can't really imagine what it would be like to not have emotions, and thus we can't truly appreciate them. But in this podcast, I'm going to discuss what, uh, how I understand emotions fit into the context of Advaita Vedanta, or the philosophy of non-duality in Hinduism, as well as just what I've learned throughout my life, being someone who doesn't experience emotions very intensely. So, in the two previous podcasts, I went quite in depth into the illusion of the ego. And if you haven't seen them, I will do over a brief summary here. In our everyday experience, the way that we've been socialized and taught to view ourselves is as if we are a free agent, meaning we are the source of our thoughts, we are the source of our actions, we are in control. And so this is why we refer to our thoughts as my thoughts, why we take possession of things and say, this is mine, not yours. Why we say, this is my life, this is my body. It's because we are taught that there is this I which is in control and possesses things. And if you investigate this I, this is what is called self inquiry. As it is said by the Guru Ramana Maharshi, uh, the process of seeking eventually leads to the disillusion of the seeker. And what this means is you are, throughout your entire life, seeking to be something more. You're always looking for something else to make of yourself. You're trying to figure out what your place is in the world. You're trying to figure out how you can improve yourself, how you can be the best you can be. And so this is our entire lives are sort of a jumping from one goal to another. We as humans, and particularly as Western humans living in a society, we are taught that you are inferior, you are worthless if you do not make something of yourself. If you're not doing something with your time that is quote unquote uh, valuable, then you are worthless. And because this is so deeply ingrained in us, often by our parents, our peers, or our superiors, we really internalize it and take it to be absolute. But there was a quote that I heard recently by the philosopher Alan Watts, which is, "What is the purpose of time except to be wasted?" And if you investigate this belief that we have that we need to be always making something of ourselves, that we need to always be improving, that we always need to be setting goals and fulfilling them, why is this true? Why do we take this to be absolute? And when we look at science, it is objective because the reason why science developed in the Enlightenment was because there was a lot of, most people relied on blind faith for their belief system and accepted the dogmas available to them. And the purpose of science was to uh, come up with empirical evidence to support claims so they are not just true because we believe in them. And this is the way that I feel about this idea that we need to be constantly improving ourselves. Is it is going on the assumption that we are imperfect as is. We are basically trained to look for imperfections in ourselves and in the world and try and find ways of improving it. In our effort to improve ourselves, we are acting as if this belief that we need to constantly be moving and growing and changing is absolute, as if it were empirical. And from my perspective, this is not the case. This belief that most of us hold, that we need to be constantly improving, is only that. It's a belief, and it's only true if we accept it. And so this is kind of the whole idea behind the ego, is that the ego is something that has it's the I that has been established by all of those around us who also believe themselves to be in control of their thoughts and their actions, because they believe that they are this little person inside of their head that's manning the controls. They perpetuate that on their children, and it is reinforced by everyone around them. So as we grow up, a analogy that I've used to describe this is, it's like when you look at a baby, you look straight into its eyes, and it is conscious of its surroundings. It's conscious of you, but it doesn't have any notion of what you are. It doesn't have any idea of there being a separation between me and you. There's no self and other for the baby, because they're not capable yet of that kind of conceptual thinking. So you look into the eyes of a child, and they are observing their surroundings non-judgmentally, which in some the Western interpretations of Buddhism is called non-conceptual awareness. Uh, and the purpose of meditation, from a certain perspective, although there are many different kinds of meditation, um, if used in the context of self-inquiry, the purpose of meditation is to recognize that even when your thoughts are absent, even when your senses are inactive, you are still there. And that you is the non conceptual awareness that exists in the baby. And this non conceptual awareness is referred to in Hinduism as the atman. And so, starting from here, this is where I can sort of explain the way that Advaita Vedanta uh, addresses emotions such as anger or despair, or pain. Although pain isn't an emotion, there is emotional pain that we all experience. And when you think of an enlightened being, a lot of people have the misconception that an enlightened being doesn't feel emotions, that they're always in a state of bliss. And although this is partially true, it is relatively true, it's incomplete. And here's why. If we are this consciousness, this non judgmental, um, non conceptual awareness that is simply watching everything that's going on in our senses, everything that's going on in our mind, and it isn't the doer, meaning it doesn't have control, then our emotions are like clouds that are passing in the sky of this consciousness of Atman. And they come and they go without any effort from the consciousness. Emotions, from my perspective, can be understood as phenomena that are occurring as a response to stimuli. They are a response to the totality of your current experience. So they are a byproduct of all the people around you, the vibes that they're giving off. They're a byproduct of whatever endeavor you're finding yourself in. They're a byproduct of your biology. Diet can have a very significant effect on mood. There are so many different factors that create our emotions, but the emotions themselves are contained within what we can call the mind. And when I talk about, I've made this mistake in both of my previous uh, podcasts. The mistake is making this division between the mind and the consciousness. Because in reality, that division is only it's a mental construct. So if I look at this, there's a container of Lysol in front of me and a table that it's resting upon. What I'm doing when I look at this is I am taking what I am perceiving and conceptually splitting it up into two things. So we're constantly doing this where we're looking around the world, which is undivided, meaning there's no real separation between things. It's all just here. And we're saying this is a thing, and this is a thing, and this is a thing, as if this universe is made up of a whole bunch of separate things. And another example of the way our minds divide up the moment is events. Everything is happening at once. Uh, this is something that is very obvious, so it sounds a little bit silly to say. But if you really ponder this, everything is happening at once. There are 7.5 billion human lives being lived at this very moment. 7.5 billion humans thinking, feeling emotions, uh, in hurting, loving. There is so much going on in this moment, and this moment is undivided, meaning the separations we make, taking a little piece of the moment and sort of cutting it out and calling it an event. There is, in a room, you are surrounded by many, many different people. And let's say you interact with your friend and you say something very funny. And this funny thing that you said remains as a memory in you. And as you continue to live your life, that memory stays with you. But that memory is very much non inclusive because what you are holding on to is just a small piece of the moment. You are taking a couple of elements of everything that's going on in that moment and calling it an event as if it's separate from everything else. So constantly we're taking the world, which is undivided, and dividing it up into little pieces, dividing it up into events, dividing it up into separate things, dividing it up into separate people. And the most important one in the teachings of Advaita Vedanta is our mind is looking at other people and acting as if there are separate consciousnesses, as if my consciousness is separate from your consciousness. And this is no different from our mind separating the world up into separate things. It it seems very sensible because of the way that we've lived our lives, the way that we've been taught to think. Uh, for example, with the IQ system, the way that your IQ is rated is how good you are at making distinctions. So we are schooled on how to split up the world into categories and chop up the world with our thoughts. And this is what is referred to in Hinduism as Maya, or illusion. We are living in an illusory world because we are chopping up the world into pieces using concepts. So this is where you'll find the spiritual seekers, monks that go off into caves for 30, 40 years at a time. Shramanas in ancient India were the name for forest dwellers, and they would renounce everything and live in the forest, free of pretty much all social interaction. And the reason for this is they wanted to experience life without concepts. They wanted to experience oneness. Because so long as we are dividing the world up into a bunch of separate pieces, we're not able to recognize and more specifically experience that it is all one and undivided. That our consciousness is not divided up into 7.5 billion people plus all of the animals that exist. That it is only one. This one consciousness, which appears to be separate because of uh, the concepts in our minds that divide up the world into little pieces. This is called the atman, the one consciousness. And emotions are like this. Emotions are phenomena like this Lysol bottle in front of me. It is one piece of everything that is happening in this moment. The entire universe exists in this moment. And if none of it is separate from anything else, it's all one and uh, indivisible, then what an emotion is inseparable from everything else that is going on in your internal experience. So we look at our internal experience and we say, I am feeling sad. We say, I am feeling mad. I'm feeling jealous. I'm feeling confused. But if you investigate what this actually means, what are these words pointing to? When I say the word deodorant, that is a collection of symbols. D is a symbol. I is a signal, a symbol. O is a symbol. You get the point. Deodorant is not what this is. It is just a concept that is pointing at what is actually here. So this deodorant that I'm holding in my hand is what it is. And because what it is in reality cannot be named because it is non-conceptual, I have to assign it a concept or a name. So we say this is deodorant. And the only reason why this is problematic is if we mistake the word for the reality. Because in reality, the universe is non-conceptual. And this is where we run into a trap. This is where our emotions become problematic and we judge ourselves for them. If you look at the emotion we call sadness, we all know what sadness is intimately. We don't need to really think about it. And when we feel sad, it's the same as having a stuffy nose. You know intuitively. Um, it's within your direct experience. But what I would suggest is next time that you become aware of the feeling of sadness, investigate what what is this word pointing to? In the same way that the word deodorant points to this, what is the word sadness pointing to? And I would say that emotions are even more subtle than thoughts, because thoughts are something at least slightly tangible. When we say, I am having a thought, we can close our eyes and directly understand what that word is pointing to. Our thoughts are in a way similar to our senses, where you can sort of hear your thoughts. When you visualize something, you can sort of see it in your mind's eye. When you visualize a sound, you can sort of hear it. And so, in this sense, thoughts are more tangible than emotions are. But we're constantly obsessing over our emotions and trying so desperately to rid ourselves of negative emotions and to bring ourselves into positive emotional states. But yet again, you are taking what is there in reality, which is what the word sadness is pointing to, and saying that what that is negative or positive. We say happiness is a positive emotion and sadness is a negative emotion. Is that objectively true? In the sense that in science, we can say with near certainty how many electrons a oxygen atom has. And this is because it is objective. It doesn't require belief, and it doesn't require. It's not true. It's still true if we don't believe it. But with something like good and bad, with something like negative and positive, if we look at the emotion of sadness and stop labeling it as a negative emotion, is it a negative emotion? It is not. Positive and negative is what you would call a duality. And Advaita Vedanta, the philosophy which I study, is referred to as non duality. So, if you've heard of the yin and the yang, this originates from Taoism, which is a Eastern religion slash philosophy as well, separate from Buddhism and Hinduism, however. And with the model of yin and yang, what you realize is we have it's like a line segment with a dot on each side. One end of this line is negative, and one end of this line is positive. But in our minds, we will label something as boring or interesting. We'll label someone as cool or lame. We'll label something as beautiful or ugly. And don't you see that what we're doing is we are taking what's there in reality, which is non conceptual, and fitting it into a box of concepts within our own mind? This is why meditation is crucial for one's mental well being, is because when you're in meditation, for example, walking meditation, you can be walking through a forest and you are completely focused on these sensations in your body and the movements of your body. You're focused on your breathing. And during this walking meditation, as your focus shifts away from your thoughts, you can experience moments of thoughtlessness. And in those moments of thoughtlessness, you are experiencing reality. And reality is non conceptual awareness. It is exactly what the baby is experiencing when they look at you with those beautiful, innocent eyes. They are looking at the world and seeing it as it is without imposing any concepts on it. So, the goal of spirituality, of enlightenment through the lens of Advaita Vedanta, is not to become emotionlessness. It's not to become a robot. It is to recognize that the consciousness, which is like the sky which the clouds of thought and emotion pass through, is unaffected by the thoughts and emotions. It is the ego, or the illusory I, which takes responsibility for everything we do and believes it is in control, that is affected by our thoughts and our emotions. When pain, the phenomena of pain, is uh, within our consciousness, you could say, we say, I'm in pain. If there's sadness passing through the sky of consciousness, we say, I am sad. Uh, so on and so forth. We are identifying ourselves with the ego, which is, you could say, the false I. The real I being just this pure, spacious consciousness. And so, a enlightened being doesn't feel any less emotional than a, you could say, non enlightened being. The only difference is the enlightened being recognizes that the the one who suffers from pain, the one who suffers from sadness and anger, is the ego, which is not real.